I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stood there, listening to my own children plan what they would do after I was gone. Not one of them asked if I was okay, only what they would get. That night, something in me broke. By morning, I changed everything. Every dollar. Every name. Gone. And when they finally found out, it was already too late. So tell me, would you forgive them or walk away for good? The night I changed my will, everything changed. Not because of an argument. Not because of some dramatic fight. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no tears. Just silence and me, standing in the dark hallway, listening. At first, I thought I misunderstood. Ethan's voice came through the dining room, low, controlled. We need to figure this out before it's too late. Claire didn't hesitate. I'm not waiting around while everything gets complicated. Then a pause, and Lucas, quieter than the others. We just need to make sure it's fair. Fair. I stood there, just outside the doorway, the yellow light from the dining room spilling across the floor, stopping right at my feet, as if even the light knew where I no longer belonged. Their shadows moved against the wall, leaning forward, pointing at something on the table. Papers, maybe. Numbers. Plans. No one asked how I was doing. No one said my name. Let's be honest, Ethan added, almost casually. He won't even know what's happening. Something inside me didn't break all at once. It shifted. Quietly. Like a lock turning. I didn't walk in. I didn't confront them. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there a moment longer, long enough to understand exactly what I meant to them now. Not a father. A timeline. A number. A waiting game. And as I turned away, heading back into the darkness of the hallway, one question kept repeating in my mind, slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. What kind of night makes a man erase his own children from his future? By morning, nothing belonged to them anymore. My name is Harold Whitman, 72 years old. And for most of my life, I believed I had done one thing right. I built a family that would stand by each other no matter what. If you had seen us 10 years ago, you would have believed it too. There's a photo I used to keep on the living room shelf. All of us together. Ethan standing tall beside me, already trying to prove he could take over one day. Claire, perfectly composed, her smile just controlled enough to look effortless. And Lucas, the only one leaning slightly toward me, like he hadn't learned yet how to pull away. Back then, people used to say, "You're lucky, Harold." And I'd nod, because I thought I was. Ethan, my eldest, always had ambition burning just beneath the surface. He didn't just want success, he expected it. Conversations with him often sounded less like catching up and more like negotiations. "Dad, if we restructure this, it could be worth more." He spoke in numbers, in outcomes, in gains. Claire was different. Quiet, precise, always watching. She didn't need to raise her voice to take control of a room. "It's not about emotion," she once told me. "It's about making the right decision." I remember laughing at the time. I thought she meant business. Lucas, he used to be the easiest to read. The one who stayed longer after dinner. The one who asked, "Do you need anything, Dad?" But somewhere along the way, even he began to change. Less eye contact. Shorter visits. Answers that felt rehearsed. And yet, I told myself this was normal. People grow up. They get busy. They build lives of their own. That's what I believed. But that photo on the shelf, it started to feel different over time. The same smiles, the same faces, but something in it no longer matched the reality sitting across from me at the dinner table. So I have to ask myself now, honestly, for the first time in years, was my family ever truly whole, Or was I just holding on to a version of it that no longer existed? There was a time when giving felt natural, almost effortless. I never kept score. If Ethan needed capital to start his first venture, I wired the money before he even finished explaining the plan. "I won't let you down, Dad," he said once. I believed him. When Claire wanted a place closer to the city, I helped her secure the house, told her not to worry about the down payment. She gave me a brief smile. "I'll make it worth it." And Lucas, he didn't ask for much back then. Just time. Just presence. So I gave him that too, or at least I thought I did. Birthdays, holidays, quiet Sunday dinners, I tried to be there for all of it. I told myself this was what it meant to be a father, to provide, to support, to step in before they even had to ask. And for a while, it felt like it mattered. They called more often. They stayed longer. There was laughter that didn't feel forced. But somewhere along the way, something subtle began to shift. The calls didn't stop, they just changed. My phone would light up late in the evening. A name. A pause. Then a message. "Hey Dad, quick question. Dad, I might need a little help. Can we talk about something important?" Important. It always meant the same thing. I started noticing patterns I hadn't paid attention to before. Conversations that moved too quickly past anything personal. Updates that felt like summaries instead of real moments. Even when we sat across from each other, there was a distance I couldn't quite measure, but I could feel it. One night, I tried to slow it down. I asked Ethan about something unrelated to work. He nodded, answered briefly, then circled back. About that investment we discussed. Claire checked her phone mid-conversation, barely looking up. Lucas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And I told myself, again, that this was normal. People get busy. Priorities change. But then the silence between those messages started to grow longer. Days. Then weeks. Until the only time my phone lit up was when something was needed. I remember staring at one message longer than I should have. "Dad, can you help?" The words were simple, familiar, almost routine. But for the first time, I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there, phone in my hand, and let a question settle in, quiet, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Were they reaching out because they missed me, or because they remembered what I could still give? That night didn't feel unusual at first. Dinner had been quiet, almost too quiet, but I told myself it was just another one of those evenings where everyone was distracted. Plates were cleared, chairs shifted, and one by one, they moved into the dining room again, this time without asking if I wanted to join. I stayed behind in the hallway, not out of intention, just hesitation. Something about the way they looked at each other before getting up made me pause. Then I heard it. "We need to plan ahead." Ethan's voice. Low, controlled, like he didn't want to be overheard, but not careful enough. A second later, Claire responded, sharper. "Before it's too late." "Too late for what?" I took a step closer, stopping just short of the doorway. The light from the dining room spilled into the dark corridor, cutting a line across the floor. I didn't cross it. Papers shuffled. A chair scraped softly. Lucas spoke next, quieter than the others. "We're just talking about options, right?" Options. I leaned slightly toward the wall, just enough to see shadows moving inside. Hands gesturing. Someone pointing at the table. My table. Ethan again, more direct this time. "Look, we all know what's coming. We just need to be smart about it." Claire didn't hesitate. "Exactly. If we don't organize things now, it's going to get messy. Legal issues, taxes, unnecessary complications. Not one word about me. Not one question about how I was feeling. just outcomes, logistics, consequences, none of which included me as a person. My hand brushed against the wall beside me. I hadn't realized it was shaking until I tried to steady it. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Let's be honest," Ethan said, almost casually. "He won't even know what's happening." For a second, the world didn't stop. It narrowed. The sound of the room faded, like someone had closed a door inside my head. All I could hear was that one line, repeating, quieter each time but somehow heavier. "He won't even know." My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the wall. Somewhere inside the room, a glass shifted on the table, just enough to catch the light. I noticed my own reflection in it, distorted, barely recognizable. Lucas hesitated. "That's not what I meant." But he didn't push back. No one did. The conversation moved on numbers, timelines, possibilities, but I wasn't listening anymore. I didn't need to. I had already heard what mattered. In that moment, something became painfully clear. They weren't waiting for me to live. They were waiting for me to be gone. I stood there longer than I should have, just outside the doorway, close enough to hear everything, far enough to pretend I hadn't. And then, quietly, I stepped back. I didn't walk in. I didn't interrupt. I didn't give them the satisfaction of knowing I had heard. Instead, I turned away from the light, back into the hallway, carrying their words with me, not as noise, but as proof. Because once you hear something like that, you don't forget it. And you don't ignore it. I didn't go back to the dining room. I didn't make a sound. By the time I reached my study, the house felt different, not louder, not quieter, just unfamiliar, like I had stepped into a place that looked the same, but no longer belonged to me. I closed the door behind me, not all the way. Just enough. The desk lamp was still on, casting a soft circle of light across the wood surface. Papers sat where I had left them earlier. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. My eyes drifted to the photo on the corner of the desk. My wife, Eleanor. The only person who ever knew how to read a room before a word was spoken. I picked up the frame, holding it a moment longer than usual. "You would have seen it sooner," I said quietly. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. For a brief second, I let myself imagine what she would say, how she would look at me, not with judgment, but with that calm clarity she always had. And somewhere in that silence, something settled into place. Not anger. Not even sadness. Understanding. I set the photo down and turned back to the desk. The document was still there, neatly folded. My will. I had signed it years ago, back when everything felt certain, when dividing things equally seemed like the only fair choice. I unfolded it slowly. Names. Percentages. Instructions. Everything written with the assumption that love would remain constant. My fingers traced the lines, but the meaning behind them felt distant now. Almost naive. I gave them everything, I murmured, the sentence forming before I could stop it. Then I paused. Accept consequences. The room felt smaller after that. Not physically, but in a way that made every decision suddenly clearer. Every moment from earlier replayed, not as confusion, but as confirmation. They weren't unsure. They were prepared. And I had made that possible. For years, I had stepped in before things became difficult. Solved problems before they turned into lessons. Protected them from outcomes they should have faced on their own. I called it love. But sitting there, under the steady glow of that lamp, I started to question it. If love is given without limits, without accountability, without boundaries, what does it become? I leaned back slightly, letting the question settle. If something isn't valued, does it still hold meaning? Or does it slowly turn into expectation and then entitlement? The answer didn't come all at once. It didn't need to. It was already there, shaped by everything I had just heard, everything I had chosen not to see until now. I looked down at the document again, this time not as a father trying to be fair, but as a man finally seeing the full picture. And for the first time that night, my hand didn't hesitate. By the time the sun came up, I had already made the decision. Not out of anger. Not in a moment of impulse. It came quietly, the way clarity often does when there's nothing left to deny. I didn't call my children. I didn't wait for another conversation. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't needed in years. "Margaret, it's Harold," I said when she answered. A brief pause, then her voice softened. "Harold? Is everything all right?" "I need to update my will," I replied. Today. There was a shift on the other end, professional, attentive. "Of course. Come in this morning. We'll go through everything carefully." Carefully. I almost smiled at that word. The office hadn't changed. Same glass walls, same quiet atmosphere, same desk where I had once signed a document believing it would outlive me in the way I intended. Margaret sat across from me, reviewing the original file, occasionally glancing up as if searching for hesitation. She didn't find any. "Before we proceed," she said, adjusting her glasses slightly, "are you certain you want to make substantial changes?" I met her eyes. Yes. No explanation. No story. Just certainty. We went through it line by line. Names replaced. Percentages rewritten. Instructions revised with precision that left no room for interpretation. 90%, she repeated slowly, making sure she had heard correctly, to the Whitman Educational Trust? That's correct. And your children? I leaned back slightly, not to reconsider, but to finalize the thought. They'll receive what reflects their understanding of me. She paused, pen hovering above the page. A symbolic amount? Yes. There it was. Clean. Final. Undeniable. For a brief moment, the room felt completely still. Not tense, just settled, like something long overdue had finally been put into place. Margaret looked at me again, this time differently. Not questioning. Not judging. Just recognizing. "I'll prepare the final version," she said. Minutes later, the document was placed in front of me. Fresh paper. New terms. A different future written in ink instead of assumption. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than I remembered. Not because of doubt, but because of what it represented. Not just a change in distribution, but a shift in everything I had allowed until now. I lowered the pen slowly. Signed. The sound was almost nothing. Just ink meeting paper. But in that moment, it carried more weight than anything I had said the night before. I placed the pen down carefully, sliding the document back toward her. Margaret closed the folder, her voice calm. "It's done." I nodded once, then stood up. No relief. No regret. Just a quiet sense of completion. As I walked toward the door, my hand paused briefly on the handle, not out of hesitation, but awareness. Because what I had just changed wasn't only what they would receive. It was what they would finally understand. And as I stepped out into the daylight, one thought settled in, steady and unmistakable. This is just the beginning. The change didn't show up all at once. It never does. It slips in quietly, dressed as concern, sounding almost convincing if you're not listening closely enough. 2 days after I signed the new will, Ethan called. Not a message. Not a quick request. A call. "Hey, Dad," he said, his tone lighter than usual. "Just wanted to check in. Haven't talked properly in a while." I let a small pause sit between us. No, we haven't. He cleared his throat. You feeling okay? It was the first time in months he had asked that question. Maybe longer. I'm fine, I said. Why wouldn't I be? Another pause. Shorter this time. No reason. Just making sure. Making sure of what? Later that evening, Claire stopped by. No notice. No agenda, at least, not one she said out loud. She walked through the door with a controlled smile, the kind that looked right from a distance, but didn't quite reach her eyes. I was in the area, she said, placing her bag down carefully. Thought I'd see how you're doing. You've never been in the area before, I replied, not unkindly. She gave a soft laugh. Things change. Yes, they do. We sat across from each other, the same table, the same space, but something underneath it all had shifted. She asked questions, but they were measured. Timed. Each one leading somewhere else. Have you thought about simplifying things? She asked at one point, casually tracing the rim of her glass. What do you mean? The house. The accounts. It might be easier, later on, if things were already organized. Organized. I nodded slowly, as if considering it for the first time. You think that would help? I think it would prevent complications, she said, her voice steady. For everyone. For everyone. Lucas came by the next day. He stayed longer than usual, but the silence between us felt different now. Not comfortable. Observed. You don't have to handle everything alone, Dad, he said, leaning forward slightly. We're here. I studied him for a moment. Are you? He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. The pattern became clearer with each interaction. The timing, the phrasing, even the concern, it all followed a structure. Subtle, but consistent. Check in. Reassure. Redirect. Every conversation circled back to the same place, just from different angles. Have you updated anything recently? Do you know where all the documents are? Maybe we should go over things together, just in case. Just in case. I began to notice the details I would have ignored before. The way Ethan's eyes lingered too long on the study door. The way Claire's questions always came after a calculated pause. The way Lucas hesitated, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. And, through it all, I did something I hadn't done before. I stopped reacting. Instead, I watched. Listened. Adjusted. When Ethan suggested we review assets together, I nodded. That might be a good idea, I said, keeping my tone even. When Claire mentioned transferring certain responsibilities early, I didn't push back. We can talk about it, I replied. When Lucas asked if I needed help organizing paperwork, I let a small smile form. Maybe soon. Soon. Each word placed carefully. Each response measured. Not to deceive, but to understand. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't stepping in, smoothing things over, making it easier for them to be comfortable. I was letting it unfold. And the more it did, the clearer it became. Their concern wasn't random. It was coordinated. Not spoken aloud, but understood. I sat alone later that evening, the house quiet again, replaying the past few days, not with confusion, but with precision. If I had nothing left to give, would they still be here? The question didn't feel hypothetical anymore. It felt like something that was already being tested. And this time, I wasn't going to interrupt the outcome. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, the weight of it settling into something steady, something controlled. Because if they were playing a part, then so was I. And this time, I intended to see it through. The shift happened faster once I stopped holding everything together. A few days later, I let things slip intentionally. I left documents slightly out of place. I paused longer when answering questions. At dinner, I misremembered something small, then didn't correct myself. Just enough. Ethan noticed first. "Dad, you've been forgetting things lately," he said, watching me closely. I gave a faint nod, letting my hand rest a second longer on the table than usual. "Maybe I have." Claire's eyes sharpened, but her voice stayed calm. "It might be time to start organizing things properly. Just in case. Just in case." Lucas shifted in his seat. "We don't have to rush anything." But no one listened to that part. That evening, they insisted we all sit down together again. Same table, same chairs. But the air felt different this time, tighter, faster, like something was about to break. I stayed quiet, letting them lead. Ethan leaned forward first, placing a folder on the table. "We should be realistic about this. The house alone is a major asset." Claire didn't wait. "The house should be sold. It's the most efficient option." Lucas frowned. "Sold? This is his home." "It's an asset," Claire corrected, her tone sharp now. Ethan nodded. "We're talking about long-term value. Liquidating early avoids complications." "Complications for who?" Lucas shot back. "For all of us," Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. "Unless you have a better plan?" Lucas hesitated, and that was all it took. Claire turned slightly toward him. "We can't afford to be emotional about this." Emotional. The word landed harder than anything else. Their voices started overlapping after that. "You're not thinking clearly. We need to act now. This isn't how you do it. Then what's your solution?" The conversation wasn't controlled anymore. It was competing, colliding, each of them pushing forward, not waiting, not listening. And I was still sitting there, right in front of them. No one lowered their voice. No one stopped. At one point, Ethan glanced at me, but not to include me. Just to check if I was still following. I let my gaze drift slightly, as if I wasn't. "See?" Claire said quietly, almost under her breath. "We don't have time to delay." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You're talking about him like he's not even here." Ethan exhaled sharply. "We're talking about reality." Reality. I watched them, really watched them this time, not as a father trying to understand his children, but as someone observing something that had already decided what it was. The pace, the urgency, the certainty. They weren't preparing for a possibility anymore. They were acting on it. The room felt smaller with every word. The table between us no longer felt like a place we shared. It felt like a line being drawn. Lucas looked at me again, this time longer. "Dad, what do you think?" For a moment, the room paused. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Waiting. Not for my feelings. For my answer. I let a small breath out, slow, controlled. Then I leaned back slightly in my chair, my expression softening just enough to give them what they expected. "Uncertainty. I think," I said, letting the words trail for a second. Their attention sharpened instantly. "You should do what you think is best." Silence followed, but not the kind that stops things. The kind that gives permission. Ethan nodded first. Claire followed. Lucas didn't. And just like that, they turned back to each other, voices rising again, decisions forming faster now, sharper, more direct. As if I had already stepped out of the equation. I sat there, hands resting calmly in front of me, watching it unfold. And somewhere between their overlapping arguments, their urgency, their certainty, something unexpected surfaced. Not anger. Not regret. Something quieter. I lowered my gaze for a moment, then looked up again. And almost without thinking, I smiled. Just slightly. Just enough. because now I knew for certain they were no longer pretending. And neither was I. After that night, they didn't slow down. If anything, the hesitation disappeared completely. What had started as careful suggestions turned into direct plans, spoken out loud, structured, and disturbingly confident. Ethan took the lead. "We should move forward with the house," he said 2 days later, placing a set of documents on the table without asking if I was ready. "The market is strong right now. Waiting doesn't make sense." He didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at Claire. Claire nodded, already flipping through the pages. "If we list it early, we can control the timing. Avoid unnecessary losses." Losses. Lucas leaned back slightly, his eyes moving between them. "You're talking like it's already decided." "It should be," Ethan replied, his tone firm. "We don't benefit from delay." I let my gaze settle on the documents, clean pages, sharp lines, numbers arranged neatly under cold light. Everything looked precise, calculated, final. Claire spoke again, her voice quieter but sharper now. "And the accounts. We need access. If something happens suddenly, we can't afford confusion." "Access?" Lucas repeated. "You mean control." Claire didn't flinch. "Call it whatever you want. It's responsibility." Responsibility. The word lingered longer than it should have. Ethan exhaled, impatient. "This isn't about semantics. It's about being prepared." Prepared for what? No one answered that question directly. They didn't have to. It was already understood. Lucas shifted forward this time, his voice slower. "Have either of you actually asked him what he wants?" For a brief moment, the room tightened again, but differently than before. Not explosive. Focused. Claire glanced at me, then back at Lucas. "We're trying to make things easier for him." Lucas shook his head slowly. "That's not the same thing." Ethan's expression hardened. "So, what do you suggest?" "We sit around and wait until everything becomes a problem." "I'm suggesting we stop acting like he's not part of this," Lucas said, more firmly now. Silence followed, but it didn't last. Claire closed the folder with a soft but deliberate motion. "We don't have time for this." Time. There it was again. Always the same pressure. Always the same urgency. I watched Lucas carefully. Something had shifted in him, not fully, not enough to change the outcome yet, but enough to create friction. He looked at me again, longer this time. Searching. As if he was trying to find something that hadn't been there before. Or maybe something he had ignored. Ethan pushed the documents slightly forward. "We'll handle the details," he said, his voice calmer now, controlled again. "You don't need to worry about it." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let my fingers rest lightly on the edge of the table, feeling the smooth surface, the subtle vibration of movement around it. The room felt colder than usual, not in temperature, but in tone. Claire slid another paper toward me. "Just a preliminary review," she said. "No commitment yet." No commitment. Lucas didn't touch anything. His eyes stayed on me. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you even want this?" The question landed differently. Not because of the words, but because of how it was asked. For a second, everything slowed. The voices. The movement. Even the tension seemed to hold its breath. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time in days, I saw something that didn't match the others. Doubt. Not enough to stop what was happening, but enough to recognize it. Who among them is still family? The thought came uninvited, settling deeper than I expected. Ethan shifted again, breaking the moment. "We're overcomplicating this." Claire nodded. Agreed. And, just like that, the current pulled everything forward again. Lucas leaned back, but he didn't look away this time. He stayed with the discomfort. That mattered. More than anything else in that room. I reached for the paper in front of me, not to read it, but to move the moment along. To keep everything exactly where it needed to be. Because the clearer they became, the clearer everything else did too. And now, for the first time, I wasn't wondering what they were planning. I was watching it unfold, step by step, decision by decision. Not to stop it, but to understand exactly how far they were willing to go. By then, there was nothing left to guess. Not about their intentions. Not about their timing. Not even about how far they were willing to go. Every conversation, every glance, every carefully placed suggestion had already formed a pattern, and I could see it clearly now. So I stopped trying to read between the lines. I started listening to exactly what was being said. Ethan came earlier than usual that morning, already holding a folder before he even sat down. "We should finalize a few things," he said, placing it on the table as if it had always belonged there. No greeting. No pause. Claire followed not long after, her steps measured, her expression composed. "It's better to settle this while everything is still manageable," she added, pulling out a chair without asking. Lucas arrived last. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at both of them, then at me. I noticed that. I noticed everything. They sat around the table again, forming the same arrangement as before, but this time, there was less pretending. Fewer pauses. Fewer attempts to soften their words. "Let's not drag this out," Ethan said, opening the folder. "We've already discussed the major points." Claire nodded slightly. "We just need confirmation." Confirmation. Not permission. I let my gaze move slowly from one face to another. Ethan focused, direct, already anticipating agreement. Claire calm, precise, watching for the moment to move things forward. Lucas, still there, but different now. Not fully aligned, not fully separate. I held that image for a second longer than necessary. Then I looked down at the table. "I've been thinking," I said quietly. All three of them reacted subtly, but instantly. Ethan leaned in. Claire's hand paused over the papers. Lucas straightened slightly. I let the silence stretch just enough to pull them closer. "About what?" Ethan asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the glass of water in front of me. My hand moved slower than it needed to. Just enough. Just enough for them to see it. Claire's eyes narrowed, almost imperceptibly. "Dad," Lucas said softly. I set the glass down carefully. "I think you're right," I said. Ethan exhaled, almost relieved. Claire's posture shifted forward, ready. Lucas didn't move. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this," I continued. "More than I have." It wasn't praise. But they took it as agreement. "Exactly," Ethan said quickly. "That's why we need to act now." Claire slid the top document toward me. "Just review this. We can move step by step. Step by step." I placed my hand on the paper, but didn't read it. Not yet. Instead, I looked up again. At each of them. One by one. Long enough for it to feel deliberate. Ethan met my gaze without hesitation. Claire held it, steady as ever. Lucas hesitated. There it was again. That small crack. That quiet resistance. I didn't acknowledge it. Not out loud. Because at this point, saying anything would change the direction. It would interrupt what was already unfolding. And I wasn't going to do that. Not anymore. "I trust you," I said finally. The words landed exactly as expected. Ethan nodded. Claire relaxed. Lucas looked away. And just like that, the room shifted again, this time faster, sharper, more certain. They began talking over details, moving ahead, filling in gaps I hadn't asked about. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting their voices blend into a steady rhythm. Not chaotic. Not yet. Just building. Because this wasn't the moment. Not for confrontation. Not for truth. Not for anything that would stop what was coming. I folded my hands together, resting them calmly in front of me, my expression unchanged. On the surface, I had agreed. But beneath that, I was measuring. Timing. Waiting. Because everything they were doing now, every decision, every assumption, was leading somewhere. And this time, I wasn't going to interrupt the process. I wasn't going to correct them. I wasn't going to save them from themselves. I had already made my move. Now, I just needed to let theirs play out. He wasn't confused. He wasn't uncertain. He wasn't weak. He was waiting. It didn't take long for patience to turn into pressure. What had been presented as discussion quickly became urgency, then expectation, then something harder to ignore. Ethan came back the next evening, this time without knocking. The folder was thicker now. Finalized. Structured. "We've gone through everything," he said, placing it firmly on the table. "This is ready." Ready. Claire stepped in right behind him, already pulling out a chair. "All that's left is your signature," she added, sliding a pen toward me with a smooth, practiced motion. I didn't reach for it. Lucas lingered near the doorway, slower this time. Watching. Listening. I let my eyes rest on the documents for a moment, then looked up. That was fast. "It had to be," Ethan replied, his voice tighter now. "We can't keep delaying." Claire leaned slightly forward. "We've simplified everything. This protects your assets and avoids unnecessary complications." Protects. Avoids. Words chosen carefully. Repeated often enough to sound reasonable. I stayed quiet. Just long enough for the silence to stretch. And that's when the shift happened. Ethan's tone changed first. "Dad, we talked about this. You said you trust us." "I do," I replied calmly. "Then sign it," he said, a little too quickly. Lucas stepped in. "Maybe we should slow down. We are past that," Claire cut in sharply, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the edge beneath. "This isn't complicated unless we make it complicated." Lucas frowned. "It is complicated. It's his life. It's paperwork," Ethan snapped, his hand coming down on the table with a sharp sound that echoed through the room. "And it needs to be handled." Handled. The word hung there, heavy. I could feel the room tightening around us, the space shrinking as voices began to rise, not all at once, but building, overlapping, pushing against each other. "You're rushing this," Lucas said, his voice firmer now. "And you're stalling," Ethan fired back. "I'm asking you to think. We have thought." Claire's voice cut through, louder than before. "More than you, clearly." Lucas shook his head. "This isn't about thinking. It's about control." Claire stood up slightly from her chair. "Of course it is. Someone has to take responsibility." "For what?" Lucas shot back. "For deciding everything before he what?" Ethan interrupted, stepping closer now. "Before reality catches up?" Reality. The words slammed harder this time. Their voices collided after that. "You're being reckless. You're being selfish. At least I'm not pretending. And what exactly are you doing right now?" Hands moved. Chairs shifted. The table rattled slightly under the force of it. Papers slid out of alignment. The pen rolled, stopping just short of my hand. And, through all of it, I stayed still. Not frozen. Not overwhelmed. Just still. I watched them. Every expression. Every reaction. Every word they didn't mean to say but said anyway. Because this was the moment. Not the decision. The revelation. Ethan's frustration wasn't controlled anymore, it was exposed. Claire's precision had sharpened into something colder, less hidden. Lucas was still fighting, but even that was beginning to fracture under the pressure. Just sign it, Ethan said suddenly, his voice louder than before, the edge unmistakable now. Claire pushed the document closer to me. This doesn't need to be difficult. Lucas looked at me again. Dad, you don't have to do anything you're not sure about. 3 voices. 3 directions. All colliding at once. I let my gaze drop to the paper. Then to the pen. Then back to them. Slowly. Carefully. As if none of this was unexpected. And, in a way, it wasn't. Because while their voices filled the room, something else had already been set in motion long before this moment. My hand moved slightly, not toward the pen, but just enough to rest near it. Enough to keep them watching. Waiting. The argument didn't stop, but it shifted again, turning inward. You're pushing too hard, because you're not pushing at all. I'm trying to do what's right. No, you're trying to take control. Blame moved between them now. Faster. Sharper. Each sentence revealing more than the last. And still I said nothing. Because I didn't need to. What mattered wasn't what I would do. It was what they were showing me. And they were showing me everything. The room reached its peak, not in volume, but in exposure. Nothing hidden. Nothing restrained. Exactly what I needed. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my expression unchanged, my breathing steady. And just beneath the surface, unseen, unnoticed, everything was being captured. Not in memory. Not in assumption. But in something far more permanent. Because while they were focused on the paper in front of me, they never noticed what I had already set in place. The recorder was running. Every word. Every accusation. Every truth they didn't realize they were revealing. And for the first time since it all began, I didn't feel uncertain. I didn't feel conflicted. I didn't even feel angry. I felt ready. The argument didn't end cleanly. It didn't resolve, didn't settle into anything that could be called closure. It just burned out. Voices that had been sharp and relentless only moments before began to fracture, losing strength, turning into scattered fragments of unfinished sentences. Ethan stepped back first, running a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room. Claire gathered the papers with tight, controlled movements, stacking them as if order could still be forced back into place. Lucas didn't move at all. I remained seated. Still calm. Still quiet. Still watching. Fine, Ethan muttered under his breath. We'll deal with this later. Later. Claire didn't argue. She simply picked up her bag, her expression unreadable now, already distancing herself from what had just happened. Lucas hesitated, looking at me one last time, as if searching for something, an answer, a signal, anything. I didn't give him one, because there was nothing left to say. That night, the house returned to silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not heavy. Not uncertain. Just empty. The following days passed without confrontation. Fewer calls. Shorter visits. A noticeable shift, as if something had already concluded, even if no one had said it out loud. Then came the morning. No warning. No long goodbye. Just a quiet transition from one moment to the next. The hospital room was bright, almost too bright. Machines hummed softly, their rhythm steady, indifferent. A nurse adjusted something near the bed, her movements practiced, careful. I could hear voices around me, but they felt distant, like echoes from another place. Sir, can you hear me? A pause. Harold. The name lingered in the air. For a moment, everything slowed. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough to create a space between what was and what would no longer be. A single tone replaced the rhythm. Flat. Continuous. The monitor didn't rush. It didn't react. It simply changed. And that was it. No final speech. No dramatic gesture. Just the quiet end of something that had already been decided long before that moment arrived. Outside the room, footsteps moved quickly. Voices rose again, but softer this time, controlled, contained. Inside, everything was still. And somewhere beyond that stillness, beyond the final breath, beyond the silence that followed, something else had already been set in motion. Because while they stood there, processing what had just happened, trying to make sense of what came next, they believed it was over. They believed the story had ended. They were wrong. They gathered in the lawyer's office 3 days later. Not together, never quite together, but close enough to look like a family from the outside. Ethan arrived first, already tense, checking his watch as if time itself owed him something. Claire followed, composed as ever, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Lucas came last, quieter, slower, his eyes taking in more than he said. Margaret Cole didn't waste time. "Thank you for coming," she said, her tone measured, professional. "We'll begin." Papers were already laid out on the desk. Clean. Final. Unchangeable. No one spoke at first. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Let's just get through it." Claire nodded once. "Yes. The sooner the better." Lucas didn't say anything. Margaret adjusted her glasses, opened the document, and began to read. "This is the last will and testament of Harold Whitman." The words moved steadily, formal, almost detached. Names, legal phrasing, structure, everything unfolding exactly as expected. At first, Ethan's expression stayed controlled, but there was a quiet anticipation behind it. Claire sat still, hands folded, eyes focused. Lucas glanced between them, then back to the document. "And to my children." There it was. A subtle shift in the room. Not visible, but felt. Margaret paused briefly, then continued. "I leave a sum of $10,000 each." Silence. Not confusion. Not yet. Just a fraction of a second where the words didn't fully land. Ethan blinked. "What?" Claire didn't move. "Excuse me." Lucas looked up sharply. Margaret didn't stop. "The remainder of my estate, including all real property, financial holdings, and associated assets," her voice remained steady, "is to be transferred in full to the Whitman Educational Trust." This time, the silence broke. "That's not possible," Ethan said immediately, his voice rising. "There has to be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Margaret replied calmly. Claire leaned forward now, her composure cracking just enough. "That's not what we discussed." Margaret looked at her directly. "You did not discuss this with Mr. Whitman. These were his instructions." Lucas didn't speak. He just stared at the document, as if trying to reconcile what he was hearing with everything that had happened before. Ethan pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. No, this doesn't make sense. We were working on this. We had agreements. You had conversations." Margaret interrupted. "Mr. Whitman made his decision independently." Claire shook her head slowly. "He wouldn't do this." "Wouldn't." The word lingered, fragile. Margaret turned a page. "There is also an addendum." That stopped them. Ethan's frustration paused mid-motion. Claire's gaze sharpened again. Lucas finally looked up. Margaret continued. In recognition of personal care and consistent presence, a separate portion, 10% of liquid assets, has been allocated to Ms. Eleanor Hayes. The caretaker? Ethan snapped. Yes. That's absurd, Claire said, her voice tighter now. She's not family. Margaret didn't respond to that. Lucas finally spoke, quietly. He trusted her. No one answered him. The room felt different now. Not tense in the same way as before, this was something sharper. More exposed. Ethan leaned forward again, both hands on the table. We need to contest this. You are free to pursue any legal options, Margaret said evenly. But I should inform you, this document was reviewed, signed, and recorded under full capacity. There are no grounds for dispute based on competency. Claire's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Lucas looked down again. Then Margaret reached the final page. There is one more item Mr. Whitman requested to be presented. A small device was placed on the table. Ethan frowned. What is that? A recording. No one moved. Margaret pressed play. The room filled with a familiar voice. Calm. Clear. Unmistakable. If you're hearing this, then you've already heard everything else. Ethan froze. Claire's fingers tightened slightly against the table. Lucas closed his eyes for a brief moment. I didn't make this decision in anger, Harold's voice continued. I made it after listening. A pause. You spoke about me like I was already gone. The words settled heavily. Ethan looked away. Claire didn't. I realized something that night, the voice went on. I gave you everything, except a reason to value it. Lucas lowered his head slightly. So I changed that. Another pause. Not long. Just enough. What you receive now reflects what you showed me. The recording ended. No dramatic finish. No raised voice. Just silence. Real silence this time. Ethan stepped back slowly, shaking his head. This isn't over. But it was. Claire didn't move. For the first time, she had no response ready. Lucas remained seated, his gaze fixed on the table, not at the papers, not at the device, but somewhere deeper. Because in that moment, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the decision. It was about understanding something too late. Everything they had planned. Everything they had assumed. Everything they thought they controlled had already been seen. And quietly, completely, taken away. For a moment, no one moved. Not after the recording ended. Not after the words settled. The air in the room didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt exposed, like something had been stripped away that could never be put back. Margaret reached toward the device again, as if to turn it off. Then paused. There's one more segment, she said quietly. Ethan didn't respond. Claire didn't look up. Lucas remained still. The button clicked. A brief static sound, then Harold's voice returned, softer this time, but clearer than anything they had heard before. Love doesn't wait for inheritance. The sentence was short, simple, final. No explanation followed. No elaboration. Just those words, placed exactly where they needed to be. And that was what made it land. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Claire's fingers, which had been perfectly still until now, slowly curled inward against the table. Lucas exhaled quietly, the kind of breath that doesn't try to hide anything anymore. No one looked at each other. Not because they didn't want to. Because they couldn't. The space between them, once filled with plans, arguments, certainty, now held something else entirely. Not confusion. Not even anger. Recognition. Every conversation replayed itself without sound. Every word they had said, thinking it wouldn't matter, thinking it wouldn't be heard, now stood in front of them, undeniable. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair, as if trying to shake something off, but it didn't leave. Claire lowered her gaze, not toward the documents this time, but away from everything. Lucas finally looked up, but not at them. At the empty space across the table, where their father should have been. The silence didn't stretch. It didn't need to. It did exactly what it was meant to do. And then it was over. The room didn't hold them for long after that. Ethan was the first to move, pushing his chair back with a sharp, controlled motion. "This isn't finished," he said again, but this time the words sounded thinner, less certain. He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and walked out, his steps quick, almost impatient, like leaving could undo something that had already happened. Claire followed, slower, more composed on the surface. She gathered her things carefully, avoiding eye contact, her expression rebuilt piece by piece. At the door, she paused for half a second, then left without looking back. No argument. No final word. Just distance. Lucas stayed. He didn't move right away. He sat there a moment longer, eyes still on the table, as if something invisible remained in front of him. Then, quietly, he stood and walked toward the shelf near the wall. The photo was still there. The same one. All of them together, smiling, close, untouched by everything that had come after. He picked it up slowly, holding it in both hands, his thumb brushing lightly across the edge of the frame. For a second, it looked like he might say something, but he didn't. Instead, he exhaled, soft, unguarded. "Dad," he murmured, almost too low to hear. The room didn't answer. He looked at the image again, longer this time, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Not in the picture. Not in the present. Then a thought settled in, quiet, but heavy enough to stay. Too late. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. Because the answer was already there, in everything that had just happened, and everything that hadn't been said when it still mattered. And maybe that's where this story doesn't really end. It shifts to you. Because everything that happened in that room wasn't just about money, or a will, or even betrayal. It was about a question most people avoid until it's too late. If the people closest to you only stay because of what you can give, what are they really holding on to? And more importantly, what are you? A father? A safety net? Or just an opportunity waiting to be claimed? So let me ask you directly. If you were in his position, standing there, hearing everything, knowing exactly how they saw you, what would you do? Would you forgive them? Would you tell yourself they didn't mean it, that pressure changes people, that family deserves another chance no matter what? Or would you walk away quietly, completely leaving them to face the consequences of who they chose to become? Because here's the part no one likes to admit. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones who already know your value and decide to measure it anyway. So where do you stand? Team forgive or team walk away? There's no safe answer here. Only honest ones. Drop your choice in the comments and don't just say it. Explain it. Because someone reading your answer might be standing at the same crossroads right now. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, question, or see something differently, make sure you subscribe. There are more stories like this, and some of them might hit even closer than you expect.